This show does not provide medical advice. If you're having a medical emergency, please call 911. Anything you hear here should be discussed with your primary healthcare provider. Hello and welcome to Everyone Dies, the radio show produced by Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal it is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I'm Marianne Matzo, and for the next 30 minutes, I am your host. Everyone Dies is a radio show that allows you, the listener, to hear from all different kinds of people who deal either with serious illness, dying, death, bereavement. And today it is my pleasure to introduce Lucy Morganstern. Now, Lucy is a violinist, a professional violinist who, before COVID, I guess we could say, played for the American Ballet Theatre and the American Symphony Orchestra. She's, as I said, a professional violinist, a healer, and a pet doula. And so, welcome, Lucy. I'm so pleased that you're going to talk with us today.
Thank you.
So, what is a pet doula?
Well, I think this is kind of a new designation. What I do and want to do more of is to support people and their pets at the end of life, at that last chapter of life, when I feel that there's so little support for people going through this very terrible time with their pets. And so my hope is to assist people and their pets so that the death experience and the whole dying and death experience can be more fulfilling, so that completion can occur, more loving, more peaceful, and I feel that unfortunately these days in our death-phobic society, people are very unprepared. People are unprepared for death of people, but I think especially with their pets, no one really wants to think about that end of life for pets. People, they don't want to think about that. It's too painful. I didn't. And so then I think what happens is that people get very unprepared. They're unprepared when that time comes. And then I think it's very, very stressful. And so what I do and what I hope to do more of is to support people, help them, guide them through that traumatic time. And I feel that in so doing, it can actually be a very fulfilling experience. And I think that afterwards, after death, the grieving process, I'm hoping, is alleviated somewhat because people have a chance to prepare for the death of their pet and do it in a more conscious way.
So how did you get involved in doing this? What motivated you to think about it in this way?
Well, it's actually been a development, and I guess years ago somebody asked me the question, well, how did you get started? I had to think back, and I think it really all boils down to, or it goes back to when I many years ago found two kittens outside of my parents' home in Brooklyn. They were abandoned, forlorn, flea-ridden little things, and I had a real epiphany when we took them. Everything changed for me, and I was just amazed at how deep my love for these animals were, and it changed me, and I think it set me on the course that I've been on. And what happened was that one of these kittens, when he was around a year old, died suddenly. We thought he might have been hit by a car. And my sister called to tell me this. I just felt like the grief was so unbearable. I just didn't know how I could stand it. And I started thinking about him and realized that in this 1 year, he had helped my family so much. This particular kitten was very joyful. He had a real joie de vivre, and he was gregarious, and he had a sense of humor, and he was an amazing being. And with the advent of these two kittens into my family's life, they really helped my family heal. We, at that point, were not getting along. And but because we shared the love of these cats, we started talking to each other, we laughed together, and we had the shared enjoyment and shared love of these beings. So when this cat died, his name was Goldie, when he died, I immediately went, I live in Manhattan, I got on the subway, went back to Brooklyn, and we had a funeral for Goldie. We buried him in the backyard behind the garage. And I think that was really the beginning. Over time, I started doing ceremonies for pets, memorial ceremonies for pets, and I was doing that. But then with the other brother, whose name was Blackie, he was a black and white cat. We didn't have very creative names for them. I'm sorry. We just based it on the way they looked. We had Blackie and Goldie. Blackie lived a long life, but he survived my parents. And my mother died in January, and I took Blackie to live with me. I had two cats too, and Blackie wasn't well. He was around 15 at that point, and he developed cancer of the mouth. And the vet was somehow they had failed to inform me that Blackie had cancer, believe it or not. They never got back to me about the test, but I brought him back because this problem was ongoing, and then when the vet told me that he had cancer, and he said, well, you know, I could just put him to sleep right now. And I thought, no. And I happen to know that Blackie, through an earlier time in our lives, when I had to, the first time I actually communicated with an animal communicator, I had found out that Blackie did not want to be euthanized. And so can I just pause you right there? What's an animal communicator? Okay, so an animal communicator is a person who is a psychic and who can talk to animals, as it were, who knows what they are feeling and can communicate with them. And in this instance, I had brought Blackie with my mother to the vet for, I guess, a checkup, or maybe there was something going on with him. When we came back home, Blackie started avoiding me. My feelings were so hurt. What's going on? I love Blackie so much. I thought I loved him more than anybody, and I was very hurt that and it was obvious. I'd go into a room, Blackie would leave. I'd go looking for him, and I'd find him, and he would leave. And so I just thought, what happened? And so that was the first time I guess I knew somebody that knew of an animal communicator. So that was my first time speaking to somebody, and she told me that Blackie had said that he thought that when we brought him to the vet, we had brought him to be euthanized, and he did not. And he obviously did not want to be euthanized. So she cleared it up. I said, oh, no, that wasn't it. She cleared it up with Blackie, and then after that, everything was fine. So after that, I that was my introduction to animal communication. So so then when, Blackie had this diagnosis of cancer of the mouth, I had at that point I knew a number of animal communicators, some of whom were my friends, and I checked to see what did Blackie want. Well, Blackie was, believe it or not, enjoying life I think because I was spoiling him. I was so happy to have him. I just wanted him to have everything I felt he hadn't had before. And he had his own room. I had played music for him. He loved music. He had his own little bed. I got him flowers. You can't imagine. I was just so happy to have him. I wanted him to feel very loved. And I felt so bad because my parents had died within a year of each other, and it was so hard. And then we went through hospice with Blackie because, even though I was prepared, if he changed his mind, I was prepared to have a vet come. But Blackie, he just went to the end, and in that's the other stream of my work, is that it was such a profound experience for me. It was very challenging and very hard, of course, to watch. And to be present with him. But, and it took a while. And Blackie, but every time I check in with Blackie was enjoying life. And so he died in his own time. And so that was my first experience with doing hospice for animals. And then after that, other of my animals, also when they got into that space of, last chapter of their life, I always asked them what they wanted, and they always chose to die naturally. So I had a number of experiences, and it was so, trying to think of the right word. It was a very, very spiritual experience. On the one hand, horrible to watch. On the other hand, something so amazing was going on a kind of a spiritual level, that my feelings about death really changed, and about the dying process. So
how did they change?
Well, my mother had died in hospice at home, and it was very difficult. She was in a lot of pain, and then finally when we called hospice in, then she was, they gave her morphine, but it was just very difficult. Maybe also it was my mother, my best friend. I didn't want to lose her, and I knew she was suffering, and it was very, very hard. But the good news was that the hospice nurses were so wonderful and so helpful. So, then 6 months, 5 months later, when Blackie developed cancer of the mouth, I only had my own parents' deaths to refer back to, and Dad had died in intensive care. So I wasn't with him when he died. But then going through this process with Blackie, who was unafraid and was savoring life, enjoying life, it was like a revelation to me. And I could see that on the one hand, something horrible was going on, and that was the cancer as it developed. But then on the other hand, something beautiful was happening, and that was this big presence in my apartment. And I saw Blackie, who had, I have to admit, been kind of a difficult cat. He was kind of irritable, and in many ways, he'd become my dad's cat. He kind of took after my dad in both good and bad. But Dad was, could be quick-tempered and irritable, and Blackie was like that too. But I watched all of this fall away. All of this, his whole personality, it's almost like it fell away, and what happened instead was this presence, which I didn't really know what to call, his spirit, his soul. Maybe it's the true essence of who Blackie really became more and more present, and it was so inspiring. And I wasn't the only one who noticed this. When people came over, they also noticed this. So, and then a year later, one of my other cats developed, it was horrible. She developed the exact same cancer. And then we had to go through it all again, except this time knowing what it was like. And she had been a fearful cat. She wasn't like Blackie. Blackie was somebody called him the old general. But my cat was much more of a fearful cat. And I thought, oh my gosh, how's it going to be for her? Well, she also chose to die naturally. And again, I saw the same thing happened. All the fear, all the timidity, the whole personality aspect of her just melted away, and instead this beautiful, beautiful presence rose. And and I've been, over time, as other of my animals died, I saw that same thing happening. And so my feelings about death changed. I thought, perhaps we misunderstand death. Maybe there are gifts that come with death because we come from a society that is death phobic and doesn't want to look at death. We try to put death behind us. We try to avoid death. We do everything we can to prolong life and put off dying. And it started occurring to me that maybe we were missing out because we weren't flowing in the process. We were resisting the process. And so my feelings have really changed and evolved. And so now, in terms of what I would like to do for people, I know how difficult it is. It is so hard when your beloved, possibly soulmate, is dying. And all sorts of feelings come up. And then you also have to make decisions most of the time. You have to deal with vets. You have to decide what course of action to take. And maybe you don't feel prepared to be making these decisions. And so then there's so much anxiety. There's anxiety and fear of loss and grief. And then I also feel unfortunately, we're not there for our animals either in the way that we could be, because they're so sensitive to the way we feel. And do
you think it's something in the American culture that says, well, we'll just take them to the vet and have them put down rather than going through and allowing natural death?
I don't know how it is in other countries. I assume it's somewhat the same. And I understand why people want to do that. We don't want our pets to suffer. But I think that sometimes pets perhaps are not suffering. Maybe they're uncomfortable. But I mean, but I'm not against euthanasia. If an animal really is suffering, then I think that is the kind thing to do. But in the case of my animals, it didn't get to that extreme. And so they were uncomfortable, but still there was something else going on. And so I have, for a long time I was very pro-hospice because I had such wonderful experiences with it. But over time I've come to realize that at times euthanasia is also the right thing to do. But if people are going to do that, again, I've seen when people are unprepared, and let's say they bring their animal to the vet and the vet says your animal is suffering, and well, people don't want their pets to be suffering, and then maybe they feel like they have no choice but to have their animal euthanized then, but they're not ready. And then I think it can be extremely traumatic afterwards. I've seen it. I've experienced this with people. So that's another reason why I really want to be there for people, to help them to move through this process with grace. And then if it comes to the fact that maybe the animal will be euthanized, at least have a chance to say goodbye to your pet.
Right.
To explain to your pet what's going to be happening.
Or even stay with the pet, because I know in a lot of vets, they just take them away. And
right.
you're not with them.
Actually, that happened to me. That happened to me.
Oh, did it?
The last, I guess it was my last cat who died, Ursula. She was dying. I brought her to the vet that day simply to see if they would hydrate her because she hadn't been drinking, and I thought maybe it would make her feel more comfortable. And the vet said, I can't even do that. I think that, that could kill her. And, we're talking for a while, and then I said, well, I guess it came to it. She said, why don't I just take her in the back? I could just put her to sleep. Why don't I just take her to the back? And I said, no. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take her home. And if I feel like she's suffering or she's starting to suffer, then I will have a vet come to the home and put her to sleep at home. And then amazingly, as I'm about to leave the veterinary office, the phone rings, and it's my friend who's an animal communicator, and she and I have been very much in touch about Ursula. Mm-hmm. And I said, Ray, I'm at the vet, and the vet wanted to put Ursula to sleep. Ask Ursula, what does she want? What does Ursula want? And Ray said, Ursula says she wants to go home. So I brought Ursula home, and she died the next day. But the time that we had at home was so precious. It was so beautiful. People came and said goodbye to her. A dear friend of mine who particularly loved Ursula came over to sit with her, to meditate. And this friend was there when Ursula left. And her death was very, very peaceful and very, very beautiful. And, and when I think about how it could have been if I had let the vet bring Ursula to the back and just put her to sleep there, and what actually happened, which was so beautiful. And I don't know, it was so peaceful. And so these are these are some of my experiences, but I think it's just dependent upon every person, every animal, every situation, that you need to find what is the best way of working with it. And my hope is to bring some peace into the process.
Well, and also part of, with humans, is part, like our "at everyone dies," is that understand what your options are, right, as people. What are your options? Well, that's also true with your pets. What are your options? If you aren't aware that there's any other option than to have your pet taken to the back and being put to sleep, then you don't really know any better than to say, oh, okay, right? But if you know that there's pet hospice, or I had a black lab when my kids were young, and he started to have seizures, and the vet said, these dogs, he's embarrassed to be having these seizures. He doesn't like it. It's stressful. It's suffering for him. And he said he needs to be put down. And I said, I don't want him. I was a hospice nurse at the time. I said, I don't want him dying here. And he said, I can give you the medication and give it to him rectally, and he can go to sleep in your own house. And so that's what we did. And we looked at picture books of him all throughout the girls' lives up to that point, and talked to him and talked to the girls, and just was with him, all the way through the end. And then one of our neighbors dug a big hole because he was a big old dog, and I was going to pay him, and he said, no, that's for Lincoln. And so we had a funeral, and it was good for the kids, and it was good for us, and it was good for Lincoln. But if I hadn't asked, can I have the medication? Can I do it a different way than what you're suggesting? That's how it would have turned out, of being taken in the back. And so I think for our listeners, ask a different question. Is there another way? Are you willing to have it be a different way?
I think that's wonderful. I think my impression is, I'll just say that my impression is that for most vets, or many vets, hospice is not really an option. Although, you know what, it's starting now. Some more alternative vets, of course there weren't that many of them. I think now hospice is actually starting to come in as an option. But I think for many, they don't consider dying at home. Maybe they consider it cruel. But I have had enough experience to know that it is not cruel when your animal is loving you and loving life and dying, but in their own time, in their own way. I think I like to ask the animal, honestly. I mean, I do go through animal communicators. I usually get it right.
Do you?
I'm pretty intuitive. I usually get it right, but I always check. I want to know what they want, and of course I'm with them. And the other thing that I do want to say, I know we'll probably have to end pretty soon, is that it's just terribly important that people have support during this last period. Mm. There is not enough support for people. It is so excruciating going through this, and so I really encourage people to reach out and find people who can support you through this process, because it is hard. And a lot of times people don't feel that they can talk about how much they love their pets and how much they're suffering at the thought that their pets are going to be dying. They don't feel, not quite kosher to talk about it. But I really encourage people to talk about it.
Do you know the concept of disenfranchised grief?
I do know that, yes. Yes, I do.
So for our listeners, disenfranchised grief is, feeling sad about something that people wouldn't necessarily say you should feel sad about. Like if your ex-husband dies, or, somebody that's, not necessarily related, but it's a loss. And I think that losing your pet is part of that disenfranchised grief. It's like, well, your pet was euthanized, okay, get back to work. And we don't say, well, let's send a sympathy card, or tell me about your pet, or any kind of acknowledgement of what a tremendous loss that is. But that's a member of your family. That's when I got my kids are 13 months apart, girls, and they were in high school, and they were going through that period where I'd come in from work and they weren't happy to see me, and they weren't, teenage girls can be not necessarily nice. And I got a dog, and they said, dog, and I said, because I want somebody to be happy to see me when I walk in the door. And Harley was it, and he still is happy to see me. Every time I walk in the door, I could walk out the back door and walk in the front door, and he's still happy to see me. But, it's like why you got that pet in the first place, the associations, like with your cats at your parents' house, and that association with your family, and that feeling of we feel good together because of these cats. All of that goes with it. And then to just say, well, they died, move on, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem even possible. We need to be able to grieve our pets, and perhaps people acknowledge it. Now, you do I don't know, is it proper to say pet funerals or pet memorials?
Yeah,
what is it that you do?
I do. I call them ceremonies. It depends on, the circumstances. But I used to call them memorial services. Then I changed it to ceremonies. But when one of my cats died, I actually had a party for her. This cat had lived in a small room in my apartment when I first got her because she was kind of wild and attacking my other cat. So she that was her room. And then later on, I started renting out that room. And this cat, Lily, would come to visit the people who were in the room. And I said, Lily thinks I would tell them, Lily thinks this is her room. And so many people passed through that room and became friends with Lily. Lily was a dear friend of these people. So after she passed, I actually had a party, and I invited her former roommates to this party so we could celebrate. We could celebrate Lily. And so it depends, but I agree with you, and I feel that with the relationship we have with our pets can be so deep, so loving, so profound. And I feel we should honor them. We should honor them when they die. In one way or another. I do encourage ceremonies, but it could even be a conversation with somebody. Talking to somebody about how much you loved your pet, and maybe they knew your pet and they loved them too, but sharing. It could be writing a poem, but I feel that they should be honored just as we honor people when they die.
Yeah.
I feel we should honor the animals, and I feel that was just kind of a forgotten piece.
So what do you do in your ceremonies?
Well, I create ceremonies and I work with the person whose pet it was, and we create what is, I kind of through them get to know the animal, and I get to know the person, and then it's like what resonates, and I feel that creative process of creating the ceremony. I mean, just to give you some for instances, and we talk about pet read. A lot of times, I have some beautiful poems that I like to read. I'm a violinist. Almost all of ceremonies, if not all, I have played a piece. Usually, many times, most of the time, I would improvise because I had that gift. So I kind of in the spirit of the animal in that moment, I would create a musical piece. So I would
that's
play.
Incredible.
And it could be, it really could be anything that feels right. And I feel that process of creating the ceremony is part of the healing process too.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a stock ceremony that I do.
Mm-hmm. It's personalized.
And I spend a lot of time kind of communing beforehand. I live with the ceremony before we have it, because I just find it so profound. I find love of animals so profound, such a profound thing, and I'm so happy that people are now starting to recognize how deep these relationships go.
Yes. Now, what do you have for pets now?
In terms of,
do you have cats?
Oh, you mean COVID?
No,
it hasn't. Well, recently, actually, what's happened is I have been more involved in helping a number of my friends. Their pets died recently, and I have been doing a lot of counseling and sharing and just trying to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to be there for most of these people were my friends. One was somebody that had attended a talk that I gave and had contacted me. But I really do my best to just be there for people, knowing that people lack support, and I feel like that's something I can give.
And so if our listeners want to get in touch with you, you have a website. It's called ceremoniesforpets.com. That's www.ceremoniesforpets.com. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about this. And I know that you do a lot of other kinds of work, so hopefully be willing to chat with us again in the future. And so our guest is Lucy Morganstern, and her website is www.ceremoniesforpets.com. So thank you for spending time with me today during our show, which is Everyone Dies. You can read our blogs and listen to our other podcasts at everyonedies.org. That's EVERY, the number 1 dies.org. Thank you to our producer, Jeanne White, and our CEO, Lillian Caldwell. We produce a new show every Wednesday to answer questions related to life-threatening illness, dying, death, and bereavement. Remember, you can listen to Passionate World Talk Radio on Spreaker and our shows wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic you'd like to discuss on our show, please email Marianne at everyonedies.org. That's Marianne, MARIANNE, at everyonedies.org. EVERY, the number 1 dies.org. I hope that you live your best life every day. And remember, every day is a gift. Thank you for listening.